a staff meeting about like Quorum. What can we do like that around Quorum? And we don't have the resources, no matter the size of the organization, to do it. How do we practically accomplish something like that, say around a Jewish holiday or something like that, with a limited resources and limited staff resources and limited dollar resources?
Do you want a pragmatic answer, or do you want, you know, like, 'cause the fact is, I think that most of these tools, by and large, are very inexpensive, and what it really takes is an individual on staff who has the time and the expertise to make it happen. So, for example, there is an organization called something Fire. I'll remember and I'll tell you. But they make a Facebook app that lets Wildfire. They make a Facebook app that lets you do all these sorts of campaigns. Very easy, white label, off the shelf, 1, 2, 3, deploy. You can have a fancy social media campaign. So, and that's not terribly expensive either. So the fact is that it's not that expensive. It really just takes the time, the expertise to make it happen. I don't think that. I mean, I respect the fact that nonprofit professionals are overworked, particularly Jewish nonprofit professionals. I feel like we're all doing 3 people's jobs. But at the end of the day, if what you aspire to is to make this campaign happen, then you have to just make it a priority and make it happen.
Just briefly on that, I mean, I think this was a case where when we worked with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, we tried to add value where they needed us. So their staff was still very much involved. They actually did the coding on the mini site. They were answering the Facebook posts and the tweets and all of that. We were coming in and helping them think about the overall strategy and working very collaboratively. We also helped set the overall sort of tone, look, feel, and thinking about how it should work and making sure the pieces connected. But it was very much a collaborative process, and I think you know, the best examples I've seen is where the sort of in-house and outsource are working together. But of course, there's still funds. And yes, these tools are cheap, but you have to have the staff time to deal with it. And I don't know the easy answer to that other than hiring more, perhaps.
Great, thank you. I just want to pull out a couple threads that I heard between you. And then you're welcome to pepper these guys with questions after we're done. I heard both of you talk about surfacing and promoting the stories of participants who are doing your mission. Right? So it was stories of people who are doing service projects, people just like me. Oh, I could be doing that too. And stories of people who are shaving their head and who are battling cancer. And I think that that's a really important part. I'm not surprised it was in both of these stories. I just want to draw some attention to it. That the organization is a platform for promoting the stories of real people within your mission. And I think that's powerful. It's not so hard to do. It's a shift in thinking. You're not talking about the institution. You're talking about the people who are doing the work that you want to see in the world. And the other piece is about authenticity. Whether it's the CEO or it's the participants, it's about real people and authenticity. And the final part is that I think the Baldacious campaign, which I think is really interesting, is creating a conversation piece on the ground in the real world in relationships. Right? This is also the Movember, which is men growing mustaches, right? When you walk out into the world and you see somebody who's never had a mustache, and all of a sudden they've got this big crazy mustache, you're like, what's up with the mustache? And they tell you the story of the mission of the organization and the campaign, and when your friend tells you that they're raising money for cancer research, well, of course you're gonna give. So I think creating these conversation pieces, maximizing the relationships and maximizing the in-person, not just online, is an important way to translate all of this as well. Thank you both for sharing these stories, and I'm sorry we don't have more time for conversation.
I'm so excited to be here with you today. The next hunk of time that I get to have with you is, although we had time for only one question there, it's all question time. The entire thing is question time, so hopefully you've been thinking of your questions and you have them in mind. I'm here today to help you, but not with what's in my head, with what's in your heads. So I'm looking for issues and challenges that you're facing in your work, like the thing that's giving you the most stress this week, or the thing you're really excited about starting when you get back to the office, but you don't quite know how yet. I need to hear those. I need to hear your issues and your challenges, and then we're gonna figure out at least one baby step to get you started on that path. And I'm completely certain that this room of people has lots of expertise in it already. I just did this with a group of nonprofits, 30 nonprofits from all over the world. and they were able to figure out solutions to each other's problems, even though they had huge geographic distance between them. So this is going to be comparatively easy.
And I'll also have your handout in the...
Excellent. Yes. So we will take notes because it's hard to remember things, especially things you talked about on the first day of a conference. So we'll take notes.
And we're going to share the notes.
I'm going to keep the notes and never tell you about them. So who has a problem? Any issues? Any challenges? Anyone's like, I forgot my Twitter password? Well, we'll take the whole range. Anyone who's like, I need a strategic plan? The entire range is a fair game. Yes?
Norman Reed from Jewish Funds for Justice. Coming up with an issue about having enough content to populate all of our web platforms. Getting people in the organization used to producing content and thinking about what we can use online rather than having it funnel through one or two people in the organization.
Great question. So I think one way to start to approach that problem, does anyone in the room have a content plan, even if it's only in their head, for how they populate their different web properties?
I've actually worked with a lot of organizations with similar problems, and the way they tackle it is they reach out. They talk to, especially influential, let's say people who have lots of followings on similar kinds of blogs or things like that, and they get the guest post. Write a blog post once a month or a series once a week. Ask them to do, 6 posts on a series, and you give them exactly what you're looking for that fits with their in the wheelhouse, and get them to go. And so it gives you content, it gives them exposure, that kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Meredith Polsky with Matan. One of the things that we found helpful, because when we started this we had a similar problem, it really helped to divide things into categories. So for example, on our blog we have a category of guest bloggers, like you're saying, a category for articles, a category for events, a category, in our case, for downloadable educational activities for kids, program spotlights, a bunch of different categories, and we have mapped out how many times a month each of those things are supposed to happen. So when all is said and done, it's pretty frequently, and well populated.
Cool. Those are both awesome. Oh, there's even another. Wow.
What we do and what a lot of organizations we work with do is we have an editorial calendar for content like possible blog content, newsletter content, all kinds of stuff for the year. And as things happen externally, like if you start to look big picture and you start to say, okay, what's happening in the world next month, or what's happening, what do we know is coming up? What conferences are we attending that's relevant, or where is the content happening outside of us? You can start to put it on your editorial calendar and plan for it, and then you can fill in with stuff that comes up. I think the problem happens when you're sitting there going, oh gosh, what should I blog about today? But if you kind of take yourself out of the minutia and look at the bigger picture, there's actually a lot of content. It's just a question of sort of sucking it up, and sometimes it's, you hear a great story and you're not ready to blog about it today, but you might be next month, and you got to capture it, and so an editorial calendar can do that.
How do you manage staff, basically to getting tools, to trying out tools to the extent that you can figure out if it's really useful or not before they hop on to the next new exciting thing?
We're doing a small number of things well before doing a large number of things
Not
mediocrely.
My name is Mayan. I'm from Shatil. I'm both in social media, how we're going to engage, how we're going to listen, what sort of various outlets we're going to do that on. And sort of we're now looking at the next step. And I think we're sort of a little bit of a loss, or maybe not so much understanding as to how we can move forward. And attending this conference is definitely one of those ways to help us out, but I'm sure there's a million minds in the room that can also add.
So if I understand where you're at, right, you did a bunch of thinking and you made a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And have you started to implement the plan at all?
Yeah, I mean, on a basic level of, I don't want to feel like Adam's gonna like Facebook and Twitter and sort of, or updating website posts and things like that. But I think at a very basic level, and I think, if I've taken anything from this morning, it's that we can go so much bigger and so much, not to jump into it, but that there's so much more out there.
Awesome question. Anybody have recommendations for how she can move forward strongly now that she has a plan and has started implementing it?
I think
think one of the biggest challenges that we have where I'm at, which is at the Shalom.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sorry, I'm at the Shalom Center in Jerusalem, and I think one of the things that we've encountered is we're also working on a plan now, and I think it's challenging because we're sort of very basic right now, and we're at the very tactical level. So when you start planning and doing a strategy, I think it helps to implement it in phases. So pick, and also you have a plan for Facebook and Twitter and all of these different social media applications. It might not be the best to start with them all at once. Pick the one that can serve you, get to know it, how to interact with it best with your audience, and then move on to the next one.
Facebook's a great idea. Any other ideas? Your name?
I'm sorry, I'm Randy Univer with RRC. I would say don't fall in love with your plan too much. Listen to what happens as you start and let the community tell you where they want to be, what excites them, and then go there. As opposed to saying, oh, but we have to be in these 5 arenas because the plan says these 5 arenas must be covered.
Interesting suggestion. Anybody else have an idea?
I'm not knowing your plan or where you're at, I would say focus on the people and the networks and the relationships more than the tools, because those are the people who are going to amplify and make anything that you do in the future successful. So you can create a great Baldacious campaign, but if you don't have the people and the relationships and you don't have their attention, it's not going to go anywhere. In the network nonprofit, they talk about free agents. So those are the people who aren't necessarily employees or on your board, but they're really committed to what you do and are also really active online. So I'd say figure out who those people are and how you can be engaging them deeper so that you create that strong people foundation more than the technology.
Are there any other people who are at the same kind of phase where they've created a plan and they started implementing it? Who has a plan in this room?
I'm website product manager and also consulting organizations in Israel, social change organizations. So I see that when people really need something, like if someone at my organization wants to create an online service, so then they're really up to study and learn how to use Google Forms and so on, and then they see it's useful, and then the next time they use it.
So I think that we've had a couple of good case studies today. Does anyone else have a case study they've written up for something or are presenting at NCC that they want to share?
Could you just summarize that real briefly so we couldn't hear over here?
Sure. Let's see how to summarize that. She suggests that case studies are one way to give your staff the idea that more depth in a tool is useful. Did I summarize that?
Building reports and revisions and roadmaps, you might lose out. It's important too to do that, but if you could divide and conquer your staff where most of them, or 99% of them, are spending their time learning, at least for that purpose, and then you have someone who's sort of committed to always keeping an eye on the latest thing, then you'll always have someone who's looking to try new things, and maybe they're not the deep person. That way you could always see what's the latest, and you could have the effect of that leapfrogging that he's talking about.
I have one example that's new and don't know where it's going, but we were invited to the Salesforce conference in New York recently. 3 of us went because it was free and only a day, and learned about Chatter.com, which is their new, relatively new platform for within an organization, and have gotten about 5 of us sort of at the lower level and who are younger and more receptive to it, using it. And I say that's the immediate goal, is to get all the people who are receptive plugged in and see if it can do as much as they say it can do in terms of reducing email, facilitating cooperation, and keeping people up to speed on what's going on.
Kind of the habit of your workday. Does anyone have a routine that do they spend like 15 minutes on Twitter like every 4 hours, or does anyone have a set routine, or is it all free form?
I was just going to say that's part of my editorial calendar.
Oh, cool.
It's like Twitter, Facebook.
Nice.
Like a little bit at certain times, trying to balance like what I do each day.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And Beth Cantor has some amazing blog posts in this area about how to set up habits so that it doesn't take over your whole day. And the other thing, which is something that Beth Cantor does a great job of talking about, is what is it called? A graceful funeral. She has some good term for it when you tried something and you decide it doesn't work. And that's something I'm trying to work into my own habits more. That when you do start to explore a tool, you give it a set amount of time, and you can be a little bit flexible about that. Like you thought you would need to try it for 2 weeks, but you actually need to try it for 4. That's fine. But then have a conversation about it and share with your colleagues. I tried this thing, and it didn't do what we thought it would. But here's what we learned, and we're gonna stop experimenting with this tool for now and move on. So there's at least 2 good Beth Cantor blog posts somewhere in that giant pile of posts.
I was just at this session at South by with this guy, Scott Belsky from Behance Creative, and he was amazing, by the way. And he talked about self-reassuring behaviors take up to 25% of our time during the day, and that it's one of the biggest things that slows down the ability to take an idea from idea to execution. And he calls them behaviors such as constantly checking your Facebook and your Twitter and reassuring yourself through your Google Analytics that it's still exactly what you thought it was, which I know I do, right? But I thought when you're talking about time management, that was probably the single most important piece that I probably got out of the entire conference.
That's really cool. And there was one more comment I want to say.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that a lot of people are fearful of the tools that they don't understand how to use, and they don't think it's going to have practical applications to what they're doing. So if you know that a tool has practical applications, that's the best lens through which to approach that with individuals, because I've done a lot of consulting one-on-one, and I often find that it's really helpful for individuals to sit down with another person, not in a classroom environment where they feel like very overwhelmed and like everybody's on a different level, where they can really ask you one-on-one questions, and you can show them through a practical lens that's relevant to your work, how it's going to provide them with additional information and how it doesn't have to take over their lives. So those are the 2 kinds of elements, the personalization and the creating of a schedule, of a personal training regimen, if you will, for getting used to being in this new environment.
About planning, I also think it's important to differentiate between your organizational communications plan and a campaign-specific communications plan. And sometimes the campaign stuff has to be the faster, more reactive, down and dirty stuff. The organizational stuff I think is easier to plan and make editorial calendars. But also I think the campaign stuff is really the great opportunity to experiment with different tools, because if your campaign is finite, you can try a new tool for it, and then when the campaign goes away, you can stop using that tool and assess it, and then you haven't set up this whole, Foursquare thing that you don't want to maintain, and now it's embarrassing, right? So I think it's really good to differentiate between those 2 things.
Are you feeling like you're ready? Not scared? Next issue.
So, mine is just how do you work with? You have staff that are not in traditional roles, but they're using all of these tools, and they're bridging the gap with training and having, you can have the nicest email template in the world, but when you get it in the hands of somebody that was hired to be a program staff member, but they're responsible for designing the email newsletter, how do you, we're just looking for new strategies and how to better train people.
It's a really serious problem, and I don't think we can solve it.
And I find that a lot of people feel like any critique of their work is criticism. And if you can shift that culture and define those words differently and create a space for group critique, and it's like an honor to be the one being critiqued, you create more refined lenses among a whole group. So you may not need outside trainers to come in and work with everybody. If you can get the 10 people who are doing e-newsletters to have brown bag lunch together at a conference room once a month, and each time you critique 1 or 2 of those e-newsletters, everybody gets to understand what are the attributes that make it successful. And I would say that includes graphics, layout, writing, and the stats of opens, click-throughs, whatever, and then everybody is sort of coming up together.
Something in Photoshop or in Dreamweaver, or you don't. So how do you bridge the gap? Like, is it, or are we just needing to culture shift in our organizations to changing the type of people that we hire?
Yeah, put it in the job description.
Right.
And
The training part is really hard, and I think it also has to do with how you structure your organization, because do you really want the program person to be sending out the newsletter, or should it be the marketing department? So I think, I just got back from Israel for 8 months, and I was training the Israeli staff there because they don't get it, and part of the conversation was, okay, here are the tools, here are how you use them, and when you're ready to use them, don't do anything, come to me, because I want them to understand that they need to bring the content to me to push out.
About like dividing, being clear about roles.
Yes.
Might be a good help there.
Something about training, I mean, you should remember that different people in different states use different tools for social media. For example, in Israel, we much less use Twitter because it's much easier in English, and we cannot use it on cell phones in Israel, so we use it much less. And in the Russian immigrant community in Israel, and I guess here too, they have different separated Facebook. It looks like Facebook, but it's called Be Contact or Be Connected or something like that, and it's it's their Facebook, and if you want to direct them and talk to them, you better be there and not in Facebook. So I think that, again, the question of who are we directing and what tools they use can help us a lot.
And to get back to the question here about how do you use the staff that you already have to carry out programs that require new skills? Did you have
Another idea is just to use YouTube. I mean, if it's really a skills-based a question, or someone's kind of stuck doing the same thing over and over, there's usually a YouTube out there. We found that's helped to actually, some of our staff isn't even just skilled in some basic new computer, and there's a YouTube for that.
And put it quickly two ways. One was the piece that Adam said at the beginning, which is about one-way communication versus two-way communication. Or to put it another way, which is to look at the culture of an organization and really get people to address the fact that they need to listen better to what's going on out there. Because I think we get all so busy in our work, and I'm not sure that we're backing up and listening. And I think we have to really confront that head on.
Okay, so you're looking for ideas about how to work on transforming the culture to be more of a culture that's focused on
listening, seeing the value of listening, and really defining who our constituents are out there as opposed to just sort of doing what we're doing.
Does anybody have a quick example of how they do that at their org? Or another idea?
The moment where a lot of people in organizations kind of get the value of listening is when they hear the voices of their constituents, like the baldacious comments on Facebook that are really compelling and connected to the constituents. Not an example from my organization, but Red Cross has an internal newsletter that goes out daily and it could be weekly or monthly in your organization, with just moving snippets from and interactions from supporter conversations that give a taste of genuine interaction to staff members it puts them closer to that conversation, even though their direct role organizationally within your group might not be to be so connected to that conversation.
Cool. Any other quick ideas? One of the things that we do at TechSoup Global, the organization that I work with, is it's kind of intimidating to sit in all of the tweets and the Facebook stuff, and there's just the RSS feeds. If you have a lot of volume, it can be hard for people to start to get engaged with that. So we have a large staff, which is cheating. It's completely cheating. But we have some staff who help produce weekly reports, or sometimes if there's like a crisis, we produce a report every day or every couple hours, to pick out some nuggets and keep our leadership informed of what's going on. And they've just gotten used to that as a decision-making tool, to be able to have, and it's just an internal communications issue really, to be able to start to get that stuff in. And I have found that was kind of a gateway tool, because then they want to start being in the tools and having those conversations themselves. So to have kind of the gift of someone to digest it and hand it to you on a platter can help with shifting leadership into a listening mode.